So you may have heard the news that Jerry Lee Lewis, the notorious singer behind Great Balls of Fire, the song, has died at the age of 87.
One of the last survivors of rock and roll's golden age, but his life was also marred by scandal and violence.
So Elton John, who says his love of the piano was influenced by him, tweeted this tribute: "Without Jerry Lee Lewis, I wouldn't have become who I am today. Thank you for trailblazing, inspiration, and all the rock and roll memories."
And the Beatles drummer Ringo Starr said, "God bless Jerry Lee Lewis and love to all his family."
Well, let's talk now to the broadcaster, Bob Harris. Very good morning to you, Bob. We'll get on to some of those. Yeah, lovely to see you. We'll get on to some of the sort of tributes and his music in a moment. I think it feels right to deal with some of the other things first, in a way, about his lifestyle and some of the moments in his life that people have found a bit difficult to deal with, including his marriage to a 13-year-old girl. Just tell us a bit about that part of his life.
Well, he arrived in Britain in 1958 to tour here, following the impact of his early hit records. And, you know, we can't disguise the impact of those early hit records. They were absolutely incredible. They smashed onto the scene, you know, 57, 58, Great Balls of Fire, High School Confidential, Whole Lot of Shaking Going On. These were records actually that were forming the spine of my own personal singles collection at the time. And he came over to do a tour here on the strength of these, the success of these hit records. And he brought with him his new wife, who was 13 years old and was his cousin, one step removed, I think, was the relationship. Obviously, it created the worst possible scandal. He'd only got 3 dates into the tour when the tour was cancelled, and he went back to America, and this effectively set his career back, as you would expect it would, for several years.
And it wasn't just that, because and I think you should talk about his conversion to kind of country music as well. But his life was beset by tragedy. When you read the litany of what happened to him, he lost 2 sons, he married 7 times, yes. 2 of his wives died, he was involved in violent incidents, he had terrible drug addiction problems. And yet through all of that, and lots of question marks about his own role in various episodes in his life, he was one of the first people to be inducted in the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So do you think that he was given an awful lot of leeway that, I don't know, other musicians perhaps wouldn't have been? I don't know how he kind of managed to navigate his way through all of that, really.
It is incredible. You're right about that. But ultimately, the story is that the music transcended the chaos, really. Yes, there were some bizarre violent incidents, not least of which when he kind of tried to break into Elvis Presley's Graceland mansion with a bottle of champagne and a gun. You know, I mean, it was crazy. One or 2 of the stories that I personally, heard about his background. There was a friend of mine, a guitarist called Michael Caton, who stopped by Jerry Lee Lewis's house to see him, and he approached the house. There was huge amounts of noise going on inside the house. Michael got to the door and knocked on the door, and all the sound in the house just stopped. It was as if somebody had switched a light switch. And a few moments later, Michael's still standing at the door. He's knocked 2 or 3 times, and then he sees the barrels of a double-barrel shotgun appearing from the letterbox. You know, I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis was a crazy, wild man. But the incredible thing about it was, if you like, you know, it's the same with so many artists, particularly country artists, that their lifestyle sort of bleeds into their music. And that was the case with Jerry Lee Lewis. His music genuinely reflected in some ways, but transcended the chaos of his life. You're right, there was a lot of tragedy. You know, 1962, losing his son to a swimming pool accident. I think his son was 3 years old. You know, Jerry Lee was a persistent survivor. And I think in many ways that's also the way now that he'll be remembered.
Bob, we talked about that tribute from Elton John, amongst others, paying their tributes. And I think for a lot of people, their image is him at the piano, that energy that he had at the keyboard with those songs. And that stands the test of time. You look at that, and that was quite something to behold.
Particularly at the time, Charlie, as well, because, you know, for us here in the UK, it's still post-war. We're still in the era of austerity. Musically, the people that we've been listening to previously were the crooners, the suit and tie singers. Suddenly, there was Elvis, and then suddenly there was Jerry Lee Lewis. There was rock and roll. There was this unbelievable raw energy. And quite frankly, nobody had really seen anything like this before. It's hard to imagine now. But that was the case at the time. It smashed through everything. It was an incredible experience seeing these flickering black and white films of Jerry Lee Lewis. And then, you know, when he came over to the UK, briefly, we saw him on TV and everything. I mean, I had never seen anything like it. It sent a sort of shiver down your spine. The only other person, I suppose, that was comparable at the time really was Little Richard, and both he and Jerry Lee, you know, would stand at their piano. They weren't just playing the piano; they were absolutely thrashing the life out of it. I mean, it really was an incredible thing to see, and so different from everything else around it at the time.
Bob, always nice to catch up with you. Thank you so much.